You're highly experienced, applying for roles that seem tailor-made for you. You aren't getting interviews, or they just don't lead anywhere. And when you reach out to your network, the feedback is polite but vague. Looking at LinkedIn, less experienced people seem to be landing roles that would actually be a perfect fit for you, and you start to wonder if the problem is actually you. What you're going through has a name. It's what I call the invisible wall. I've been a career coach for nearly 7 years, working extensively with highly experienced executives. Today, I'll explain why this wall actually exists and why it's not your fault. The invisible wall is this very specific experience. You send out applications, but get few responses, and sometimes none at all. Job openings that match your level seem to be getting scarcer. When you do find them, the competition feels much more intense. You know all the job and career advice, but you realize it's become outdated. That's normal. Everyone is following it. You feel like the rules of the game have changed, but nobody warned you, and nobody's really explained it. The common thread among the executives I coach is a sense of confusion, a feeling that the old rules no longer apply, a thought that might have crossed your mind. What got you to where you are today isn't necessarily enough to land a new role anymore. It's not just a feeling, it's a diagnosis. This wall isn't in your head, it's structural. First point, the collapse of the traditional career model. Everything is changing. For a long time, the market operated on a cumulative logic. The more experience you had, the more visible you were. The more visible you were, the more opportunities you had. That logic has imploded. Experience is no longer a sufficient indicator of value. It's becoming neutral. The market isn't necessarily looking for long careers anymore, even if, for now, it still values them quite highly. The market trend is to value clear profiles for a specific context, right now. Second point, the gap between old habits and the new rules. You might still be searching the old way, detailed resumes, cover letters, mass applications, but the rules have changed. What worked 10 years ago is stopping working altogether, and might even be counterproductive now. While transferable skills were highly valued in the past, today, they just create confusion. A broad background is now seen as a lack of specialization. If a recruiter doesn't immediately see the match between your background and the job description. Third point, corporate frugality. Companies have learned to operate with fewer roles, less flexibility, and less tolerance for risk. They won't be returning to the abundance of the past. Hiring is becoming increasingly selective, with higher standards and longer processes. Fourth point, HR cognitive overload. HR departments are overwhelmed with applications. They filter through unclear profiles in just a few seconds. Faced with this overload, they use a simple logic: eliminate risk before looking for value. If your profile raises questions due to a lack of clarity, vague transitions, or a title that doesn't match, well, you'll likely be eliminated very quickly. Why? Because these elements contribute immensely to your visibility. What you feel is, I have experience, I've proven myself, I'm competent, why isn't it working? The system sees a long career path, vague transitions, and imprecise positioning. What you feel is, I'm versatile, I can adapt to many different contexts. But what will the system see? A lack of specialization and a risk of misalignment. I'm looking for a position that matches my experience. That's likely what you're thinking. What HR will see is no clear targeting and a generic application. This gap isn't a matter of bad intentions, not on your part, nor on the recruiters. This disconnect is actually a structural problem. You're reading the market with old rules, while the market uses today's rules. The idea is to change your perspective. Between the two, there's a wall, the wall of misunderstanding. So, how do you change that perspective? The market isn't at all hostile to experienced executives, quite the opposite. It's simply become hard to access for those who still view it through an old lens. The old lens tells you, show everything you've done, prove your value through your long career. That wealth of experience is no longer necessarily a safety net. Today's lens tells you, show what you do better than others in a specific context, reduce perceived risk before showing value. The old lens tells you, it's about volume. The more CVs you send, the better your chances of being hired. Today's lens, however, will tell you to be targeted. What matters is the conversion rate much more than the volume. The old lens tells you, wait for the right moment, prepare yourself perfectly before making a move. Today's lens tells you, jump in before you're ready. Action creates feedback, and feedback improves the strategy. You aren't invisible because you lack the right skills. You're invisible because you're still viewing a market through an old lens. That is currently in the process of changing. This wall isn't an inevitability. It's overcome by a cognitive shift. Accepting to see the field as it is, not as we would like it to be. The market isn't going to go back to how it was. The days of abundance will not return. But in this new context, executives who see the field as it is, make themselves visible, and act strategically, practically, and cognitively will remain highly sought after. Clarity of vision will become a competitive advantage. The time to act is right now. So, where does this change really come from? In the world of before, there was abundance. We can say it very clearly. Companies grew a lot, services grew a lot, and the machine was running very smoothly. Today, more and more, we're moving toward a frugal model, meaning one where we seek to optimize and rationalize as much as possible, simply because we can no longer afford the pitfalls we've known for years. Companies have fewer and fewer opportunities and means to be able to afford failed recruitments, or to spend a lot of time training new profiles. In short, they're increasingly looking for the long term with profiles that will be reliable for them. Quite simply because a failed hire is very expensive for a company. And obviously, the budget cuts that are becoming more common and are now the norm in most companies, well, they're going to weigh heavily on the way they search. Why? For you, as a candidate, it changes a lot of things. It's a whole mindset that's shifting. Where before, the logic was basically to say if the candidate is good, if they have a track record, if they have a certain profile, well, in any case, they'll be with us for the long haul and we can afford to potentially spend more time training them, potentially wait for them to become highly skilled, and so on. Today, that's obviously less and less the case. So, companies are in a mindset of frugality. They're going to try to minimize costs, but especially all the energy that will be spent during the recruitment processes. In other words, the idea here for a company is to say, okay, where before I could afford some leeway, well, now I'm simply going to look for the best profile, as simply as possible, to make sure I don't spend too much energy myself, quite simply because the workload is increasing. And also because a profile that fits a need perfectly must be quickly identifiable by the recruiter. In other words, yes, recruitment processes remain still quite complex, quite long, especially for very experienced profiles. However, the logic of frugality means that what recruiters will target most is the direct utility of the profile, much more than their background or experiences. In other words, competition is increasing for you as a candidate. So the idea will be to improve your level of preparation, quite simply because if you have 15 candidates who are all prepared, inevitably, it's going to make it much harder. In short, the invisible wall is the situation you face with two pairs of glasses. The pair of glasses that worked very well 10 or 15 years ago is becoming totally obsolete. And that's the invisible wall. It's something we don't see, something we don't notice, and yet it's right there in front of us, preventing us from moving forward. So, as a candidate, this invisible wall is very easily overcome, with a good step back and, above all, very good preparation beforehand. I hope this video has helped you see things a little more clearly in your search. I wish you a very good day and see you very soon.